Greetings, fellow humans. I am Hugh.
And I am Man.
And together we are definitely not two kobolds in a trench coat. We enjoy human activities, such as paying taxes,
having existential crises,
and RPG horror stories. Let's see what we've got today. On today's episode, we have a player who confused being argumentative with roleplay, a group of players who entirely missed the point, and a player forced into a backstory who just wanted to be a happy hobbit.
Argumentative player leaves after being asked to keep the game moving by Reddit user X1Naruto775. Last session we played, it was right after a big, tough boss fight. The party had just gotten back from the hideout and chatted to some NPCs. Our fighter began an argument with our rogue, who is a local of the area. The fighter has always been the kind of person to turn everything into a debate. Even the fighter's player said, he works with the motto, you don't know a person until they're annoyed by super slow internet. We had many arguments and debates happen in the game where it turned into that D&D podcast from how long it takes to finish. So I, as the DM, decided to shut it down right away due to the argument being not important. It was about what kind of creature can live in harmony with the forest and if beavers do that because they cut trees. Super important debate.
Remember that old phrase, save a tree, eat a beaver?
After saying to the player to move it along, I can tell that his tone was upset. He even said, so when I try to roleplay, we need to get along? We continued along. The party went to rest while I had an NPC ask the fighter for a minute of his time. This NPC is a pirate friend from the fighter's past, and he offered to give him a map of a treasure if he helped defeat the king.
Don't do it, Cartman! I'm warning you! I'm getting pretty sick of him.
The fighter only responded with, yeah, aha, and okay. I tried to talk him out of character, but he told me to get going so I don't waste time.
So far, this isn't a massive red flag. It could just be awkwardness when it comes to roleplay. A lot of us suffer from that. That whole, you don't know someone until they're annoyed by super slow internet. I just get reminded of this bit from Firefly where the bad guy references a Chinese emperor called Shan Yu who said, tie a man up over the volcano and on that day you will meet the man. It's a variation of that phrase and generally a bit sociopathic. It's really only when you see the worst of a person is what it's saying.
It essentially is boiling people down to their worst day. And we've all had bad days. None of us like slow internet. I mean, who likes being tied up over a volcano? But we aren't our worst days. And people who say that are just people who believe that everybody is just as grumpy and argumentative as they are.
I mean, the real sociopaths are the people who put the toilet paper the wrong way on the holder. You know the way I'm talking about.
You know who you are. I did so, and when the party were opening the chest of the magic items, they got to the items, but needed to cast Identify. They got the pearl by buying it from the pirate NPC. As for the owl feather component, I decided to have them actually get it, since one of the party's members had an owl pet. So I said, let's make some RP with you needing an actual feather to cast the spell. The fighter immediately responded with, oh, so now you want to make RP. I tried to talk with him, and so did the rest of the party, but soon enough, it turned into him disconnecting. Later that session, another party member was wasting resources, and we made jokes about him saying, it's what my character would do. We made a joke in the general chat by typing, it's what my character would do. The next day, this other player was gone from the server. When I texted to ask him why he left and to try to make amends, he said that he left because we were making fun of him. I tried to explain that that wasn't the case, though he said he was still suspicious of that. I did my best to remain calm and explain why the debates that don't benefit the party or progress the story just waste time, but he argued by deflecting and talking about the other character flaws. He argued about why one of our rogue who hates humans is fine, while his character is the one who's hated. I tried again to say that it isn't about the character, but about how he plays it and the constant debates. It soon turned ugly when some insults got thrown from both sides in private messages. I tried my best the whole time not to do that, but I reached my breaking point when he kept going in circles. Rogue also tried to make amends and even explain his character's actions, even though the fighter kept calling the rogue a racist zealot. Funny enough, the The rogue began changing the flaw at the end of the session, though the fighter still complained and said, why can't he just play his character the way that he wants? Which he said is that he wants to poke holes into characters' logic with arguments. The rogue tried to continue, but the fighter blocked him, and that was the end of it. I wouldn't lie and say that I'm sad that he left. Most of the people in the group weren't fans of his, but I still regret how badly it ended with him. TLDR, fighter complains when he can't turn everything into a debate, leaves the group, and things turn ugly in private messages.
So I'm not quite sure any one person is the particular a-hole here. Maybe the guy who left was a little bit, but this sounds largely down to a mismatch of what people wanted. He may have been a bit argumentative, but also if he wanted to roleplay more and roleplay out things that were just fun to do, that's not necessarily bad. It's just a game mismatch. I don't know, maybe I'm being too lenient.
I don't know. It's not really so much of a game mismatch as much as that he's being argumentative just for the sake of being argumentative. It's just very belligerent behavior. You know, if his whole like, you know, I'm trying to like poke holes in everybody's logic. That's not what this is about. TTRPG RP is not about just trying to antagonize everybody. And I feel like he was just being antagonistic.
It's true, he was definitely a bit too much on the argumentative side, and yeah, didn't like it when something got thrown back at him. I understand that. Clearly he wasn't right for the party and was probably more of the bad guy in this, but I don't think it's anything too major what's gone on.
Yeah, I suppose I will just put it out there and say that I don't think he'd be a good fit for any party. I don't really know any party that would enjoy getting holes poked in their logic just for the sake of it. You know, maybe he will find his people. Who knows?
Oh yeah, no one likes that guy who just tries to tear apart everything everyone else is trying to do. Have your moments and let other people have theirs and see where you can help them out with each other's. It's ultimately what makes it the cooperative game that D&D is. When you miss the target so hard you hit the GM. By Reddit user, Severe Firefighter 80. So this is a pretty short story with a meta discussion, but I was curious about this category of horror story and was wondering if anyone had any of their own. My story is very short and simple. I wanted to run Blades in the Dark for a group of friends I used to play D&D with. This was about 2 years ago. I believe my friends did not understand or maybe didn't read the system or setting. Our short-lived campaign went like this. Right off the bat, in character creation, I already suspected we had issues when the players chose vices and they were all very cozy, for lack of a better term. One player chose to say that trying to feed her family was her vice. Another said that tavern crawling was her vice. My third said that his vice was sightseeing, which I don't quite know how to address, but filed away as something I could work on. The players picked the Shadows Crew playbook and decided to form a ragtag team of outlaws who stole from the corrupt rich and gave to the poor.
These vices are definitely giving like, I'm just such a perfectionist, you know, or my greatest flaw is that I care too much. You know what I mean?
I mean, sightseeing's only being a flaw if you like sightseeing in another gender's locker room.
Yeah, non-consensual sightseeing, I guess. I don't know.
Maybe sightseeing the sites of war crimes? I don't know. I'm not quite sure how this is advice. At this point, I reminded them of what I said when I pitched the game. This was a dark fantasy, so I intended to portray a bit of a downward spiral if they wanted to start as moral, relatively good PCs. I was pretty upfront with my expectations of playing a game that was more morally ambiguous. They all nodded and agreed, so I shrugged and moved on with the game. On their first score, they were presented with a twist after one player took a devil's bargain. There had been another rival gang of thieves trying to steal the family heirloom from a family of prominent Leviathan hunters, and they had just barely arrived in time. It was looking like they were going to have a fight. One of the PCs decided to call the Bluecoats police on the rival gang, reasoning that the rival gang had killed a lot more people. They weren't entirely wrong, but my PCs got very unhappy with me when the Bluecoats detained them as well for breaking and entering. After a mild out-of-character argument, the PCs were taken into custody and put in the back of a wagon, a kind of steampunk car, and one of the PCs decided to escape by using a wire to grab the steering lever of the vehicle and yank it to the side. They rolled a mixed success, and I narrated how they managed to flip the vehicle and escape their bindings, but did kill the two Bluecoats in the front of the vehicle, increasing the amount of heat they incurred on the mission and making it significantly louder. This triggered a much greater out-of-character argument because the player didn't intend to kill the bluecoats and would never kill anyone. I argued that it was the consequences of a partial success, and there were parts of the consequences I could add as a GM. We agreed to table the discussion until after the session, and the players moved into downtime.
I mean, I understand where some of these PCs are coming from if they're upset about having killed somebody, because I suppose if their intent wasn't to, and then that was part of the partial success situation, I could see there being a little bit upset, but also the DM was well within his rights to implement that as a partial success. So I guess there's arguments on both sides.
Yeah, it might have been a bit harsh to have them die in the accident. Maybe they could have just been severely injured, but I understand the decision as a GM. I don't think that's terribly unreasonable, especially if you only partially succeeded. The session ended after a player rolled to overindulge their vice of drinking and tavern crawling, and they picked the option of attracting trouble, which triggered an additional entanglement roll from me. They rolled interrogation, and when told that I could decide how the PC got picked, I said the PC got a little too drunk and got picked up for public intoxication, and the player interjected by saying their PC would never be drunk. I didn't know how to respond to that, given that their vice was drinking and tavern crawling. I just said they were identified by an eyewitness before I suggested playing a different game, and left the group shortly after. I wouldn't be surprised if this was an issue of my miscommunication, but I'm fairly sure I specified that this was a dark game about playing scoundrels. I often wonder if they had read more than the character sheets.
I'm sorry, their vice was drinking / tavern crawling, and they don't get drunk? What kind of vice is that, dude?
Not even having a beer, are they just having a Coke in each tavern? If you just go to a tavern and have a beer or two and then go home, that's barely advice, that's just what people do.
Like, are they just having a beer and moving on and pub crawling that way? I don't know.
Your vice is having live, laugh, love on your wall.
I just wanted to be Pippin. GM wanted me to be Inigo Montoya. By Reddit user Penengon the GM.
I mean, don't we all just secretly want to be Pippin? Happy, not a thought in your head, just happy being you.
You've probably read a few horror stories where the GM completely ignores the player's backstories and just forces everyone into the story they made. Well, I had the opposite problem. I made a character who was just along for the ride because they wanted to tag along. Right place, right time, and now they're on an adventure with a ragtag group of misfits. I find it easier to play these types of characters because it's just one less thing for the GM to worry about, and thus, one less thing for me to worry about. GM has enough going on, and I don't want to add to that pile. I don't need any special NPCs or towns or any main character treatment. I just want to be included in the journey. This is more or less verbatim what I told the GM in session 0, and he seemed to understand my perspective. The problem with this is actually part of the system. One part of the character creation process requires my character having experienced something tragic to give them the sense of justice and desire to do good. So I slapped together something about how my village's leader was killed by bandits when he was young, just to fill in the requirement. Session 2, the GM's self-insert NPC pulls us aside and tells me that he knows where those bandits are hiding out, the implication very much being that there would be an arc dedicated to us taking them down. Problems with this. 1, I didn't want a dedicated arc for my character at all, as I had already told him in session 0. 2, he did not consult me at all about implementing this. Everyone else had a personal arc which was discussed in session 0, and all of them started moving as planned. 3, I don't actually care about the village leader beyond his death being a motivator for my character to do good. Not that his death needs to be avenged, or that I need to be the one to carry it out. Now I have to pretend like I'm super invested in taking down these bandits, which is not the type of character I wanted to play. I guess he decided that my idea of fun was too boring and needed to fix that. Oh, but you should be grateful that your GM was willing to make you feel important. Maybe I would if he'd actually talked to me about it instead of springing it on me mid-session, especially after I specifically requested the exact opposite. This is also in a system that I hadn't played before, the mechanics of which I wound up not being a fan of, so I used that as my reason for leaving the table. Edit, YTA. Actually writing a backstory and trusting the GM to use it well is a part of the hobby. By refusing to participate in this step, I've been sabotaging both the GM and myself, preventing us from having the most amount of fun possible because I'm afraid of overstepping or being disappointed. This is something I will work on going forward. Thank you for helping me understand this, even if it took some harsh words. Though, I still probably would have left the game anyways. The combat mechanics of this system really were frustrating.
I mean, at least the DM didn't deny you second breakfast. On the one hand, yes, I feel like the GM should have respected your wishes there to just be along for the ride. However, you're also putting yourself outside of the game a bit, outside of full participation in what's going on. Maybe the table wasn't a good fit for you. I don't know. I don't think the GM did anything too bad, but this, again, sounds like maybe just a mismatch of player to game type.
Yeah, definitely. But I think the OP is on to something with saying, hey, I get that it's a collaborative experience and I wasn't participating in the collaboration, and that made it a little less fun for everybody because, yeah, at the end of the day, part of TTRPGs is the collaborative creativity of the whole thing. And it makes it more fun when everybody's fully participating and not just sort of along for the ride.
I feel like maybe there was a middle ground where maybe the GM could have involved you in the story without making it as big of a deal or as severe of a deal. Could have found some way to integrate you more rather than just being dragged along for the ride. I mean, hell, even Pippin found his place in the story in the end, despite being there for little other reason than to get on Gandalf's last nerve. Maybe after this incident, you could have had a word with the GM and drifted away from going after the bandits to something a bit more your speed. Hey man.
Hey, what?
Why do skeletons make great comedians?
I don't know.
Because their jokes are so humorous. This week's joke comes to us from Street Fighter Fan 77. If you have a joke you'd like us to read, place it in the comments below. Or if you have a story you'd like us to tell, you can submit it in the email address in the description. And with that, we have definitely not been two kobolds in a trench coat. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and make the necessary sacrifices to Tiamat. We'll see you next time.